Vanessa is and DJ's trying.
Okay. In that case, we're missing Rob, but he often comes in a minute late. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the May 16th, 2022 Grants Pass City Council Workshop, and we are going to get started digging in a little deeper on our plans for Arpa dollars. So, Aaron, go ahead and get us started, please.
Well, good morning, Mayor, Council. As the Mayor mentioned, I'm here to help facilitate a discussion with regards to your Arpa dollar allocations. Some of those items, we'll review each one of your allocated list and go into some details to get some additional information from you or direction from you on some of those also. So this is just a quick recap. I've got 2 or 3 slides just to set the stage of where we are. There were 4 pillars associated with ARPA. There's the public sector revenues, public health and economic response, premium pay for essential workers, water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Council went through and did a great survey to get feedback from the community, along with just general outreach that you normally provide to give you an idea of where you should be allocating those dollars. And through that process, you did come up with a good list of where those dollars should go. Just as a reminder, your call to action timing for ARPA dollars is the funds must be obligated by December 2024. So if we really have a clear plan and we know that they're either spent or where exactly they're going, that's the key, December 2024. And then there could be some programs or allocations that don't need to necessarily be fully spent as long as they're obligated. We have until December 2026 for that. As I mentioned, through the public comment process, through your surveys, etc., you did create a list of items where you would like to see the little over $9 million go that we received for ARPA. Eligible water capital projects, $3 million. ARPA survey, $28,000. Affordable housing, $2 million. And the list goes down. What I'd like to do today is touch on each one of those items. And Mayor and Council, this would be a question of you. When we're done talking about that one specific item, do you want me to pause and have a discussion on just that one item, or would you like me to go ahead and highlight all of the items and then have a general discussion at the end?
I'm okay with just having the discussion at the end, but...
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent. All right, we'll move forward. We're going to tackle some of the easy ones first. When I mean easy, it means ones that you've maybe already taken action on, or you've provided clear direction and there's not a lot of other council decisions that need to be made. The first one being the $3 million for the water treatment plant. Resolution 227183 was the resolution that prioritized and allocated the specific funds that you just saw previously. But actually in year 21, the $3 million was the very first allocation of ARPA dollars that council said we need to do this. And this was to help keep the rates down for the new water treatment plant. It was in alignment with one of the ARPA pillars. So moving forward, Public Works can provide direction in the future on the timing of the transfer from the LB 6417 to the water treatment plant project. The LB 6417 is really the holding fund for the ARPA dollars. So when you see the LB 6417, that's just where the ARPA dollars are being housed. So when we identify a use and council's identified a use, those funds will be transferred from that LB to whatever project that we'll be discussing. Any questions on the, oh no, wait, I'm going to continue. ARPA survey costs. I've got budget process in my head. Nick's department, and we move on. ARPA survey was another one that council deemed appropriate use for those ARPA dollars. We spent $28,200 to do the survey, which provided you with great information on how to allocate the rest of the resources. And this is basically completed in this fiscal year. We can transfer those dollars from the LB 6417 to conclude this action item. Continuing down the list, we've got portable toilets of $8,000. Some of the work that council did was they identified some additional restrooms in some of the parks with regards to COVID pandemic response. And council did allocate $8,000 of our ARPA dollars to be continued to use for that purpose. So we can just also provide a transfer of from LB 6417 to the Parks Fund without any additional council direction. Baker Park restroom. Now, this was one that council discussed, and currently right now there's $270,000 of ARPA funds earmarked for Baker Park restroom project, which is to purchase a Portland loo, similar to the other two that we've purchased. You are looking at placing 2 of those in the downtown area at 2 different locations. This would be us purchasing a 3rd Portland loo that would facilitate users in the Baker Park area. And future council action for this, because you have passed the resolution allocating the ARPA dollars. The future council action is you would see a resolution coming forward to you approving the actual purchase of the Portland loo, because that is a large purchase. It would require council action to finish. So when we are prepared to do that, we can bring that forward to you and ultimately approve it. You can approve that at a business meeting. ARPA water treatment plant trailer. So this is one that we received some new information on, which is somewhat exciting. Council wanted to have 2 water trailers, portable water treatment plant trailers, one on the north side of the river and one on the south side of the river. We currently have one in case of an emergency. If our plant goes down, if Cascadia happens, if we can't produce water at our water treatment plant, we do have a trailer that will be able to pump directly out of the river, filter in the trailer system, and provide clean drinking water to your constituents. However, in a big emergency, that trailer can't be housed on both sides of the river. Council saw that as a concern and wanted that redundant necessity of having a second trailer on the other side of the river. Through conversations with emergency management, and with emergency management working in partnership with the city, they recognize that another trailer would be a benefit to this community. So they've actually been also trying to acquire a water treatment trailer, and they did acquire a water treatment trailer for the city of Grants Pass's use. Ultimately, this trailer could be utilized by others in an emergency situation, but this would be housed and maintained with the city, and the city would have the first right of refusal, the first right of use of that trailer in an emergency. There could be an emergency in another area, say Cave Junction needs the trailer. If we're in not need of that trailer, we can then allow Cave Junction to utilize, and they'd be able to use that trailer as long as we're not needing the trailer. So with this knowledge, council may consider, and staff's actually recommending that council consider reallocation of this $200,000 to something else on the list or a new item on the list. Because if we went forward and continued to purchase this trailer, we'd actually have 3 in the community. We believe the one that emergency management has acquired for the city's use would probably suffice for council's goal. So this is something for you to consider. As we're going down the list, there's more things for each one of these following items does require additional council direction versus the first couple ones were relatively simple in nature. These ones are a little more complex and do require additional council direction. The swimming pool was also listed as an item for ARPA expenditures. In order for us to continue on the pool project, there's a few things that council is going to need. However, the transfer out of the LB 6417 to the Caveman pool can occur in the future as long as we meet those timelines. That is not a difficult decision. The other decisions that are need to come forward to council, which is slated for June 6th, is project scoping of the pool, RFP development, selection of a design firm, and construction is sort of the process of where we're moving forward there. And that's what the discussion on June 6th is for. Once we have some of those items in place, we'll be in a spot where we're going to start to be spending money on the pool, and we'll be able to transfer those funds to the Caveman Pool Fund. And again, that workshop will be June 6th, which will provide us with additional direction to move forward with the spending of those ARPA dollars, along with other resources to make the pool project happen. So the next one is portable parklet program. This was an item that council, program that council, I think, desires to have in the community, and to help with that desire, allocated $38,000 of ARPA dollars for a portable seasonal parklet program. Currently, right now, we have a program. Council has established that, and we're to assess and see how that goes. It does provide a program where the city assists through permitting process and the allowing of use of public right-of-way for the restaurants in certain areas in the central business district. Taking the spirit of that direction, a potential future action for council is to ask staff to establish a grant program to assist businesses with the purchase of portable parklet infrastructure. Under this scenario, you can, and we can have a future workshop if you'd like to schedule that, or you could give me direction at the end of the presentation today if you concur with the potential action, is to take the $38,000 and use that as the seed money for grant program. Establish a grant program where businesses in the central business district that would like to have a parklet program, and it being seasonal at this time, would like to purchase infrastructure for that, they would apply for the city for that infrastructure. The $38,000 would then be granted based on a criteria that would be established by council. That would be one opportunity for us to continue with the spirit of the way the program currently is and provide ARPA dollars for those businesses. Of course, there would be a time limit on the grant program because we do need to have those dollars spent. But staff believes that we can take care of that pretty quick and establish a grant program for allocation to a portable parklet program. Land bank. I have a few slides on land bank just so we are all on the same page on what that is, and I can get guidance if we're not on that same page or get additional direction from you. So council did want to incentivize development of affordable housing. One of the key ways to do that is through a land bank process. Council has identified $1,014,662 to go towards a land bank program. So land banks in general play a number of different roles depending on the community's development goals. And you'll see a list of things up here behind me. They do provide a mechanism for assembling parcels of, say for instance, tax delinquent or abandoned properties. Many land banks have historically in the past, this is not a new concept, it's an older concept that's been around for a while, and some communities have land banks. And they're established there for when, say, a tax delinquent or abandoned property comes up for sale, the city will purchase that, and then ultimately in the future turn that over into a more beneficial use for the community, whether it be for a commercial use or housing needs. So how a land bank works. Land banks do have an opportunity to support affordable housing development by reducing or eliminating land costs for the developer. Ideally, a land bank is set up to manage the financial and administrative resources of a program. It could greatly lower the cost of the owner of the planned development because the city can provide the sale of the land at a reduced cost. And that will help cover the cost and help make affordable housing pencil out. Developers have expressed in other communities that a land bank program or some kind of land incentive program is one of the highest and best uses of resources in order to incentivize affordable housing. And so I think this is one of the reasons why council wanted to establish this. We can also control and leverage private dollars with a land bank program, which is nice to have a public-private partnership, and this is one opportunity and tool to do so. So when we're talking about implementing a land bank, one of the things that staff would like direction on is what type of land bank are you wanting to establish? We've talked about land bank in our strategic plan. So land banking is something that council has been interested in. Arpa dollars are something that can go towards a land bank, but both things it's not like they're mutually exclusive. So moving forward, after the ARPA dollars are spent, council can continue to do a land bank program in some form or fashion, but what level of land bank would you desire? There's three main options in developing a land bank for municipalities. The first is to partner with and contribute funds to an existing nonprofit land banking entity, or to participate in the formation of a new nonprofit land bank if one does not exist. This is probably one of the most administratively effective and potential approaches to land banking from a city perspective. Something like this could be, there are some housing authorities that have land banks, and so what the city does is they just partner with the housing authority to provide resources or land, donation of land or resources to increase their inventory to accomplish the goals of providing additional housing for the community. The second way you can establish a land bank is a little more informal in nature to some degree, and that is you can use the land that, say, we already have in inventory or new land that we purchase, and just takes a few site-specific areas and utilize it as a land bank. This approach works really well for individual developments, and if you have certain areas or certain properties that you definitely would like to help incentivize for housing. And the third is a little more, I think, complex, probably the most complex of the three options, and that is the city can create a city-run affordable housing land bank. The City of Eugene, Oregon does provide one local example of having something along those lines. Another pathway is to form a land bank authority. This is a statutory authority that's provided in Oregon revised statutes and an Oregon Land Bank Authority bill. We do have the ability to purchase and acquire environmentally contaminated properties and brownfields and promote their rehabilitation for affordable housing or other creative programs. Here in Grants Pass, we don't have a lot of brownfields, but we could create something along these lines, some kind of land bank authority if we'd like to do something more formal. So from a standpoint of moving forward and the relation with ARPA dollars, there's two things. One, you have a desire to spend a little over $1 million on a land bank process. Do you want to, and you have one of your goals as creating a land bank program for the city. So combining those two thoughts, what is the ultimate goal of, and what is your vision for having a land bank for the city of Grants Pass? And then how would you like to apply those ARPA dollars? They can be discussed at the same time, or if not, at a minimum, we'd be taking the ARPA dollars and utilizing, say, for instance, option 2 of those 3 options in order to accomplish your goals with the deadlines that we have in place. A couple other things you may want to consider when it comes to ARPA land bank, just to further define what the land bank is. And these are just some considerations for you. There's about 6 of them I'd like to go through. The first is acquisition process may involve the selection of appropriate sites, number of neighborhood outreach, environmental review, and other due diligence when we're looking at purchasing property. The development process for sites acquired through the land acquisition program is separate and likely to happen several years after the acquisition is complete. I think that's a key point because some people believe, oh, you've got a land bank, you're going to purchase property, and immediately it's going to be developed. Looking at the history of land banks, it's more the norm that land is purchased and held by that land bank for 1 to 10 years until the appropriate time to develop is, because sometimes those properties are purchased when the economy is right, or say when it's tax delinquent, etc., and it's not right for development immediately after you purchase that. And that's why it's considered a bank. You could be sitting on that property for a while before it's ultimately developed. So that note is in there just because I want to make sure we have an alignment of expectations. When you have a land bank, it doesn't necessarily mean housing is going to happen immediately after you get that property in that bank. The city may perform neighborhood outreach and release a request for proposal to solicit development proposals from housing providers. That's an excellent way that you can do a public-private partnership with land banks. Once you have a piece of property, you get an RFP out and you see what the private developers can do to help incentivize and to ultimately reach the goals of council when it comes to additional housing in the community. The fourth item, just for consideration and just to further identify ARPA Land Bank, is you could establish an evaluation committee that would review and score development proposals and make recommendations. You could use something like our Housing Advisory Committee to do something like that. The city currently does hold some properties and has identified some of the property for housing, and such as Allenwood. Now you're discussing Allenwood not necessarily as an affordable housing project, but just as additional housing. But I throw that in there just because that's sort of the process you'd utilize, whether we have our own property or we've got property we've purchased and it's in a land bank, and then you would determine and move forward with how you want to get that developed. And we're starting that similar process with Allenwood. Periodically, the city would sell owned land for development as affordable housing, and properties can be sold anywhere from full market value to basically $1 if you so desire. It depends on how much the incentive needs to happen and what type of project you're talking about on each one of those properties. And council has designated creating a land bank program and in the strategic plan as a priority, and that's just listed there. Going on to the next item for ARPA dollars is $1.6 million for urban growth boundary infrastructure. So this is where we would put in water and wastewater infrastructure in advance of development to help spark development of unimproved areas, especially in the urban growth boundary. So the following is some suggested criteria that could be used to assess the highest and the best use of ARPA funds in this category. There are several pockets of potential development areas within the urban growth boundary. And ultimately, this is something that would need to come to council for further discussion and identification. Staff does have some ideas on where that could go. However, I see this project as a potential likeness to the Urban Renewal Agency, where sometimes we're there to help incentivize private investment, but not to drive it. This could be the same thing. And ultimately, if we take a look at these guidelines, which I'll go through with you, these guidelines could potentially be basically RFP, request for proposal guidelines, to where you do a shout out to developers and you say, hey, based on the following, we are going to front load a development area. Who's going to provide us with what? And this way, you can potentially get the biggest bang for your buck for taking public dollars to incentivize private investment. So let's take a look at some of those guidelines. When it comes to front-loading infrastructure, we'd be looking at sites that have demonstrated a history or clear evidence of not being developed due to a lack of municipal water or sewer services. Areas would be in need of both water and sewer extensions would be ranked higher than one just needing one of those. The amount of land that would be open to new development would be an important part. Say if you did the RFP process and you had one that would open up 20 acres versus one that would open up only 5 acres. The number of potential barriers and capital project cost estimates of the project. Some preliminary engineering analysis have been completed in some of the areas that we have. We'd focus on the 2020 census tract. Checking to see if the project aligns with a recommended capital project in the adopted master plan. That would be able to take care of two purposes. One, we'd be able to utilize ARPA dollars to incentivize housing, but also it might match up with one of our master plans and we'd be able to add a multiplying factor to the benefit for the community. Neighborhoods where there is a known property owner or developer readiness to proceed with the development. There's individuals out there that are ready to develop or close to developing, and with this incentive, that may be enough for them to move forward. Providing new system capacity to previously undeveloped land is preferred over repair or mitigation of existing deficiencies. That's just based on the spirit of the conversations that we've had right now as we're trying to open up new land for development. Existing environmental concerns and or violations could be mitigated by the new utility also. And ARPA funds can be prepared or leveraged with other readily available funding sources, especially if we do an RFP process. You could identify certain areas and the city could take the lead and just say, this area, we're gonna front load the system. But we may get, like I mentioned, more interest if we really see if there's private developers that would like to partner with us. And this is a big deal, and I think this is a great program. Jason and Brad are here also to answer any questions on this, but just as an example, if we did an RFP and we got those responses, what this program does is it allows us to put in $1 million worth of infrastructure. The developer would come in, that was the one that wanted to spark the idea, and maybe their improvement was only $250,000. Without us, they would have had to pony up the over $1 million, and they would have had to create a reimbursement district, and then they'd have to sit on that and hope other people would fill in. What this program does is it allows us to work with a private developer to put in the infrastructure, and they only have to front what their impact is to that infrastructure. So it's a cost savings to developer along with a time savings. So the next one is even a little more nebulous than the ones before. So saving the big one for last, and that is incentivized development of affordable housing. I say that because the definition of affordable housing is relatively broad, and ARPA's definition of what's allowable is somewhat broad. If you look at your consolidated plan and all the different resources that go to the nonprofits and other housing incentive programs, that's a very broad program that you approve every year. Well, that's sort of the nature of ARPA dollars when it comes to housing. So you may recall seeing this slide before and having a discussion with Ann Bernique, our housing and neighborhood specialist, a few weeks ago when we talked about what our housing program looked like for helping to incentivize affordable housing. One of the things that came from her discussion was it was clear from the industry that there are things that help incentivize affordable housing more than others. One of the top ones is land acquisition and disposition. So if the city has the ability to acquire land, provide discounted rates to land, etc., that's one of the biggest and most impactful ways to spur affordable housing, along with some allocated funding and waiver of reduced or upfront or ongoing charges. And it goes down the list to the least impactful is the production of information resources. So this really is just sort of taken from ARPA guidelines. It's relatively dry when it comes to, okay, here's your local ARPA funds for housing applications. These are the bullet points on how it can be used. So just taking another snapshot of those bullet points to give you an idea and match it with most impactful to least impactful, here's a couple of categories. You take what's allowed in ARPA, you link it into these three categories of household financial assistance, homelessness displacement, prevention services, and affordable housing development rehab. These are all areas that ARPA dollars can be used for. Staff definitely needs your direction on where would you like to have your over $1 million allocated. There's so many different items in all three of these categories. And it could be a hodgepodge of different ones. You could like a couple of these. And again, these are just suggestions. We can maybe even go broader, but these categories here might be a good starting point to help us determine where we should be spending those dollars for affordable housing. And just as a point of additional information, looking at what and how other municipalities are spending their ARPA dollars for affordable housing, 57% plan to use the recovery funds to expand or rehabilitate affordable housing stock, which is a big percentage. And the second was to focus on homeless prevention and alleviation out of those two categories. And just some examples, I've got two examples for you. Portland plans on spending approximately $16 million on the city's Safe Rest Village program, which includes outdoor shelters designed to provide safe, clean, and secure access to food and shelter for people experiencing homelessness. And an example of one that's a little closer to home is the city of Eugene. They're looking at spending just under $2 million, and this money will help cover fees and infrastructure to partnering nonprofits. So there's 4 nonprofits that are going to be developing additional housing, adding an additional 255 new affordable housing units. So they're going to be allocating some of their dollars to nonprofits to help develop affordable housing, which includes a large number of different type of affordable housing units. Just wanted to mention, Housing Advisory Committee did recommend utilizing ARPA dollars for affordable housing and the establishment of some kind of grant program. And if a grant program was established, that the Housing Advisory Committee suggested that they be the one to review the proposals and make recommendations to council on those grants. So in conclusion, we went through and we talked about each one of those categories that you've allocated resources. As we mentioned in the beginning, the first few couple, I don't know if there's much council direction that's required, additional direction, but then we go to the middle to the end of those categories, there's a number of things that we still need council direction and further discussion on. Again, funds must be allocated, obligated by the December 2024 and spent by December 2026. And call to action, we've got a number of things here. Staff initiated, we believe we could go ahead and move forward with the water trailer now. This is brand new information. The water trailer now, we're looking at a discussion with you. Do you want to pull that and reallocate those resources? If not, we would just go ahead and move forward with ordering that water trailer. Baker Park restroom, the loo, we can go ahead and move forward with that. It would be something you'd approve at a future business meeting. The portable toilets, the $8,000, we'll just go ahead and allocate that into the Parks Fund to help pay for the toilets there. The water capital project, that was done by resolution of the $3 million. That's already there and accounted for. And then along with the ARPA survey of 28,200, I think is the number. Council direction still needed, specifically on affordable housing projects, urban growth boundary infrastructure, land bank, and swimming pool, along with potentially some of the items above. And with that, Mayor, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. I was going to suggest, Council, before we launch into questions here, that I don't think we really need to talk about the water treatment plant, the ARPA survey, the portable toilets, or the Portland Loo, because those are all fairly straightforward. So I guess at this time, do you have any burning comments or questions about any of those four? Can we move on? All right. And then portable parklets seems like a fairly easy task. Does anyone have questions about portable parklets? Val?
Yeah, I just had a question. I think one of the things that we talked about was having like a 50-50, have sort of buy-in from whatever. I'm in favor of the grant program, and to have the city go ahead and establish that and the criteria, and then do it with a buy-in from the business. So that's my thoughts.
You're looking at some sort of matching grant or, okay. Joel?
That's what I was going to say.
Okay. Anything else about portable parklets, or is the council supportive generally of matching grant? Brian?
I just had a question. Are you, would that go into effect for this year, like for right now? Because I noticed this weekend that there's already at least one business that has one down there.
So we'll go through and develop the criteria for the grant, and ultimately it would take business, go to a business meeting for council to approve the program. It will likely that we'll have a program approved somewhere mid-season of the parklet season. Whether or not they are able to utilize that and they want to change up what they have to establish different infrastructure, I guess would be their call, or if they would just wait until the following year to do so.
Okay. I thought last time we talked about this, we said that they can do it on their own this year if they want to with the barriers, and then this money was going to be more for a more elaborate program next year. So it sounds like that's kind of what you're saying.
Okay. Sounds like that's where we would be at, I guess, if council wanted somehow to make it retroactive reimbursement for this year, we could do that at a later date, but I guess just to scope out the general nature of what we intend to do with the $38,000, it sounds like a matching grant. Rick?
So would that be fiscal year or calendar year? In other words?
So we have in the LB project of Arpa, we have the money there, and we have the budget to where it could all be allocated out. So it could be in this fiscal year, it could be in this fiscal year, next fiscal year, it doesn't. You have the allocation flexibility. The way we see this going is I don't see this potentially as a retroactive for them renting the barricades that they've got, and unless council would like to have that. The way it would potentially be envisioned is we'd have this sum of money that would be allowed for infrastructure development for them to apply for a grant, similar to a facade improvement grant or a building renovation grant, and they'd be able to purchase a pre-approved parklet, because there's some really nice engineered parklets out there now because it's become more popular. And if it was, say, council after deliberating or providing direction, right now I've got 50%, and that's the way we can propose it, but that we would provide grant funds of up to 50% for that pre-approved parklet, and that would be a moving forward thing. So if it's a parklet that costs $10,000, we could grant $5,000.
Okay, so it looks like we'll be working on developing a matching grant program for portable parklets, and we can finish up with details later this year. Real quick, swimming pool. We're having a more extensive conversation about the pool on June 6th. So does anybody have anything burning they need to say about that now? Joel?
I just had the expectation, hopefully it's realistic, that we would have a timeline associated with those different steps. So we would know checkpoints for the staff and the council in terms of ARPA dollars and spending of those dollars.
Are you talking about for the pool project?
Yes.
Yeah, the presentation itself, the good thing, like I mentioned about the ARPA dollar expenditures, is that it's there, and through the budget process, you'll likely have the authority to allocate and spend those dollars. So there'll be on the June 6th meeting, there'll be a general guideline on timeframe of all your next steps.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, how about water trailer? It sounds like the emergency, what do we call them? Emergency management?
It's emergency treatment trailer, water treatment trailer.
Oh, I meant the agency
Oh.
that has purchased one.
Josephine County Emergency
Management already has one. Do we still want to purchase a second one on our own? Valerie?
Well, my thoughts are, and I look at Cave Junction sitting way out there in the middle of nowhere, I kind of sometimes feel like if there was an emergency, it would probably be an emergency across the board. It would be Cave Junction, all of us. And so personally, I have no problem with still purchasing one and having one, since a good part of our population is still across the river, and then having Cave Junction right out there. So I'm not opposed to keeping and having a third one. That's my thoughts.
Did you, Brian?
Mayor, this is Vanessa.
Go ahead, Vanessa.
I second what Councilor Lovelace had just said. I think I'm very happy to hear that emergency management is willing to be a good partner on this, but I think it would be wise for us to have our own city-owned trailers, and then they could then be more flexible with assisting the outlying county if there is an emergency with that third trailer.
Aaron?
I just wanted to comment here on, because I see where the conversation's going, and Jason may be able to provide some, I'd like to have Jason provide some additional information. The concept of having two trailers, and I appreciate exactly the three trailer thing. That's the exact question I asked Jason this morning when this information came up. And the concern with three trailers is currently right now, I think we're the ones that are seen as the lead in taking responsibility of the emergency management water trailer. If we were to also purchase another one, it would be an unexpected impact to our maintenance of having, we would be owning and maintaining three trailers. And similar to when we purchase a new vehicle, we try to phase out the old vehicle and sell it, because if a vehicle's in inventory, it's a cost. And so that's additional cost that, and if it's not being used, we get rid of it. So Jason, do you have any additional highlights to that? Because we talked so briefly about it today.
Yeah, we did. This all came up really late. The grant was applied for, I want to say almost 18 months ago, and we kind of just figured it was written off, and finally got confirmation from Emily that that's scheduled to be delivered, although there is no delivery date for it as of yet. Our concern would be that we end up with more of these than we're able to operate and maintain with the staff that we have. We definitely can operate and maintain two, three maybe. You know, I'm not going to say we can't, but it is going to start stretching our resources, and it may end up not getting used. We do have right of the first use of the one from emergency management, but because that was funded through state, it is a possibility that that trailer could be moved from the area. That is one consideration.
I have a question. This particular vehicle we're talking about is to clean the water, but it's not a water delivery vehicle. So we're almost supposing that all the bridges go out, right? Mm-hmm. Because otherwise we don't need to have this duplicity on both sides of the river. We have 3 bridges in town plus Robertson, Rogue River. Obviously, we can move things around, even if one bridge went out. Yeah. Do you see any need for like a water delivery vehicle, or?
Boy, I've not been asked that question.
Okay.
I'm going to need to think about that. You know, looking at investing in our ability to move the treated water around the city to different distribution points, I think has some merit, because that's not something, to be quite honest, we're doing an exercise as part of Shakeout. We're planning on throwing the blivets. The blivets are the basically big water bags that we put the water into in the back of a dump truck. And moving that to a distribution location, looking at maybe some permanent infrastructure might merit some consideration.
Okay. Brian, did you still have a question, comment?
Yeah, the whole topic's a little muddy. I don't know that I have enough information yet. The question I did have was, I know we have the one trailer now, and there's a new trailer coming that emergency management is getting funded by a grant, but we're going to be expected to house it and maintain it at the city, and the county is not going to be responsible for that?
That is correct. I mean, they'll have some onus, but I believe it will be up to us to operate, maintain that equipment. That was my understanding. I could be misspeaking a little bit. That's my understanding.
Okay, I remember having a tour of our existing water trailer, I think maybe a few years ago. Do we have any, do we know what the differences are in the trailers with regards to capacities and robustness and resiliency?
We do. The one from the state is uses a membrane technology similar to what we're going to do at the new treatment plant as opposed to a cartridge filter. So it'll treat it to a little bit higher level, but it will also then require a little bit more maintenance. And I believe the capacity is slightly higher than our existing trailer.
Okay, thanks.
Joel?
Well, I was just thinking if we're going to pay what I call the FOR, which is replacement costs of the water, of 2 water trailers, that's a fixed cost that I think we need to consider, and I think 2 is adequate. The other thing I would encourage us to do is those bivets that you talk about work really well in dump trucks. The other thing is we do have a private sector that has a lot of water trucks, and we're probably going to have fewer of them in the future because the marijuana industry is kind of on hard times, but at least right now we got a large supply in the private sector that we probably don't need to invest in the public sector for something that we're going to need very sporadically, hopefully never, but you don't want to maintain a big fleet for an emergency that you're going to have once every 15 years, or hopefully not that often, but so anyway, I would just go personally with the 2, looking at that fixed costs of replacement costs, and do a good job of it. Maintain them, have them be top notch, and then as we go into an emergency, that we have those private sector resources available so we can all work together.
All right, given that we have some questions and potential conflict over this one, what if we have staff do a workshop at a future date? We could have Jason's team contact emergency management and put their heads together to see if there is either this particular item or a different purchase that might be in that same spirit of preparedness that those funds could be used for. Does that? Well, Valerie, thank you for nodding.
I was just going to say I would agree with that. So I'm just going to speak up in favor of that. As a matter of fact, I was going to speak up later during agenda setting because we haven't had an emergency management meeting, and I think it's time that we do that anyway with the fire season coming upon us. So it might be a good workshop in the near future.
Okay. I heard Vanessa say that she was interested in that as well. And Jason, were you going to say something?
I was just going to wonder if a memo might be more beneficial, but if we're going to tie it to an emergency management workshop, excuse me, we're good either way, but we can also just generate a memo for consideration.
Okay, I mean, I think in general, the question is just what would your and the emergency management team's recommendation be for the best use of those potential funds, assuming that we still want to spend them on something, maybe not this particular item, but something in that same vein. Did you have something, Brian?
No.
Okay. Anybody else on that topic? All right, I guess whether it's a memo, whether it starts off as a memo or a workshop, I don't care. It'll end up being a discussion one way or the other. Okay, I think that gets us through the easy things. Now we have the tough things. And I guess just a quick note here, we did originally have a second discussion on this scheduled for next week, but we bumped it to, it looks like, June 13th as a placeholder, and we moved it so that if there were things that were going to require more staff research time or something, that they would have a little bit of time to work on it before we came back at it again next week. So we can get through as much of this conversation as we want to today, but we don't have to come up with a plan for every single one of these items today. But with that said, I think I was interested in starting off on the land bank conversation, unless somebody else has a different place they wanted to start. We have three kind of housing land purchase pots of money. So questions, suggestions? Do you have questions for Aaron about land bank? Val?
I think my first question is, as we talked about this earlier, whether if we were, did have a land bank and had money in that we have set there, and if we purchased, would we just have to purchase the property by the 26th, or would that have to be purchased and utilized by the December of 26?
Yeah, my understanding, the spirit of the ARPA, and we might need to look into it a little further, but the spirit would be that the property would be identified and purchased, that might not need to be developed, but then you actually have it expended. In that, I'm not sure if just putting it in the land bank would be enough of a qualifier to meet the goal, but we can take a look at that unless JC or Adam have additional information. I would think that the safest way would be that we actually have the property or properties identified and a contract before the 26th.
It's a good question. I had two kind of definition issues that I think we need to work through, because I think different people on the council may have different ideas. And one of them is when we talk about affordable housing, I think some people have a very specific definition of a housing project that meets certain criteria, and other people may just be talking about lower cost housing. And then the other topic is just when we talk about a land bank, some people may have ideas that that's land that we purchase inexpensively, set aside for future development, whereas I think other people are thinking it's the city purchasing land and turning it over relatively quickly into development. So I think we just need to wrap our head around what we're talking about and get on the same page with those two definitions.
And that's a good point, Mary, because a land bank is used for both of those things. It's not necessarily used just for affordable housing. It's used almost as sort of an additional tool for like an urban renewal agency. It could be a commercial use type of thing also. So yeah, of course in this situation it's an allowable use as housing for ARPA, not for commercial. Yeah.
Joel?
So it looks like these three items that we have left over, they're not left over, they're a little more complicated, complex. Land bank, infrastructure, and affordable housing that we need to have perhaps alternatives explored and have it at a workshop, and then from there make a decision at a regular council meeting.
Yeah? Brian?
Well, I've got some discussion on these, so I want to make some progress today, hopefully. So on the land bank, Aaron presented 3 general options for how to implement that, and we're kind of already doing option 2. I mean, the city kind of informally has a land bank, because we own property, and sometimes we sell property and sometimes we buy property, so we kind of already have option 2. So from an ease of implementation standpoint, just continuing down the path that we've already been using seems the most efficient and the most effective. And then, yeah, one of the slides mentioned the development process for the sites. It's likely to happen several years after the acquisition is complete, and the development would take several years. But I think the city being the owner of the land in the land bank, you know, we can have a lot of control over what happens as far as, you know, the location of development, the density of development, the speed of the development, and other factors. So, so we have a lot of control over the outcome when we are running the land bank ourselves. Yeah, my impression of what we would be doing is we wouldn't be buying big, huge tracts of land out in the UGB to develop lower density housing. My thought is that we would be, you know, probably focusing on smaller, more urban pieces of land that have higher density zoning, just to do more infill projects. There's a lot of, well, I don't know if there's a lot, but there's several vacant pieces of land in the city that are R3 and R4 that are not being developed, and this is like the perfect thing to get those properties developed. Over the weekend, I went through our GIS and I identified a list of over 30 properties that, and most of them, I think about 90% of them are R3 or R4 that could be utilized for land banking or for incentivizing affordable housing. So there's no shortage. This money, you know, this $1 million is going to go really quick. You know, you're not going to be able to buy a ton of properties with $1 million. So I don't think we're going to have, you know, we're going to have plenty to choose from. It's just a matter of, you know, to me, the most important thing is, you know, Aaron had a list of metrics, and one of the most important metrics to me is how many potential units are we getting for how much money we are putting into the project. That's kind of a yardstick to measure how far our money is going. So I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
All right, so he said that his focus would be on smaller pieces of land with higher density zoning for infill. Is that the same idea that other people have in mind when we talk about land banking? Joel?
So, you know, that is good that you've done that work, and I appreciate that. You're at 9, the decision's at 10. Kurt and I are at 2. Okay, and and maybe he's at 7. I don't know, but so to have a workshop on it would not hurt.
Yeah, Joel, we will have to have more discussions about this. I just want to get us focused. So is that what you've been thinking of using this $1 million for? Is something like that, Valerie?
Well, it kind of goes a little bit against of what the purpose of a land bank is, because a land bank is to try to get the property inexpensively through, and so I hesitate to be out there competing against other developers or whatever who are trying to buy land, because all that does is drive up the price, and so you're not necessarily getting a deal on the property. You know, I would be certainly interested in taking a look at, you know, those properties. You know, I think right now there's a lot of developers who own property out there and are willing to develop property, and I personally like the idea of a public-private partnership over the city doing it. And I know that the land bank can eventually develop into that. So like I said, I'm not ready to make a decision today. I would like to see what properties those are that we're talking about. I would agree right now. I mean, I know the Allenwood we've talked about. We have a land bank that we've been using informally. At one point in time, we talked about the F Street property, and I don't off the top of my head know what that is zoned. But I also know that that is land that we currently own, that I know that we wanted to keep the upper part of that property because that's where there's water infrastructure. But there is land below that on F Street that, like I said, possibly could be used, and we currently own it. So, you know, I just like I said, I'm not totally sold on the idea yet, but if I were to see specific properties and kind of have an idea of what that looks like, I would be open. So I'm with Joel on that one. Let's take a look at what some of those properties are and whether they are affordable to buy at this time.
Brian?
Yeah, I think just to touch on a couple of those points, I wouldn't think that the city would be buying land from a developer that already owns a property, that doesn't make any sense. The land bank would be more for properties that are not owned by a developer, just private party. If it's already owned by a developer, we would use the affordable housing bucket to incentivize development for those in a different way. And then, the purpose of a land bank is really whatever we decide it to be. That's why we're kind of talking about this, is there's different ideas of what a land bank is and what it should be for grants passed right now. So ultimately, it's whatever we decide that we want it to be.
Vanessa?
I also did envision the city utilizing these acquisition funds for more of smaller lots to really incentivize the infill projects that we're looking for. We don't want to fall victim to urban sprawl. We want to take advantage of the resources that are already built out and help incentivize that because it's not currently being done. I also would like to see a really quick turnaround on the acquisition and the selling or the donating of these funds for development to help alleviate our housing crisis as soon as possible and close the gap on the housing deficit that we have.
Okay, any other comments on land banking for today? We will have another workshop on this in the future. Obviously, we have some bunch of details to sort out. How about urban growth boundary infrastructure to jumpstart development? Do we have questions or comments on that today?
I do.
Val? Mike?
Yes, I got it. I've actually heard from a couple of people, private people who own property, who are very interested in this because they have property that they have invested in and are looking for the city to kind of front load some of that infrastructure as we talked about and whatever. So this is the one that I'm the most interested in because I do think that there are developers out there who own property that would step to the plate if the first step was done by the city. So I really like the idea of going out and contacting them and finding out, doing RFP and saying who's ready to develop, who, so that we had an idea where we could get the biggest bang for our buck, because I think that's what I'm looking for, as is, Vanessa and Brian. How can we get the best, the most development to happen to help get us out of this crisis? So I like that idea of the public-private and to contact people out there who would be willing to develop if we were to front load some of that infrastructure.
Any questions or comments about this section? Joel?
So, building on what Val said, and unlike the land bank, the infrastructure and their partnership with the private sector and the interest rates and the RFP and the timeline for Arpa. So I'm trying to integrate those four subjects together, and if we do a request for proposals, that's going to take time to put it together. It's going to take time to do it. With the interest rates and that, how much interest are we going to get? We're not quite sure with the inflation. So that would be something I would think that we'd want to put out there, and if there is demand in the private sector for that, given the economic conditions that we're under, or the economic conditions that are going to be next year, we'll be able to know the answer, and then there will be other options if that demand doesn't utilize those resources. Because, the last time we had this type of interest rates, contractors went out of business and left town. So hopefully that won't happen this time, so if we're going to do the RFP, it'd be nice to do that in a timely manner because of that reason, and see what the demand is, and then if the demand isn't that high, we can switch it over to a different strategy.
Vanessa?
I do see this as being one of the most tedious programs that we'll be using to fund the ARPA dollars. So I would like to see us get started on this right away. I know we'll have to meet on the Housing Advisory Committee for some recommendations. The motion specifically stated in strategic locations, so this just isn't haphazardly creating reimbursement districts. This is looking where we want to incentivize and what type of housing we'd like to incentivize, and really building out in that area, looking to 20, 30, 40 years from now. So I'd like to give direction for the Housing Advisory Committee to start working on that, to bring that back to us. And also if staff could start looking into those reimbursement districts and how we move forward on making that decision as well.
Brian?
So in this category, it's actually going to be, for me, the same in all three categories with this one criteria. How much money are we putting out? How many units are getting built? You know, it's kind of like an ROI, like how many units are we getting for the money that we're putting out? So I didn't necessarily see that in the guidelines for this particular category, but I certainly think that should be one of the scoring criteria for every category, as that's kind of the whole point of why we're allocating so much money to these categories.
Other discussion on this one? Val?
And I agree with you, Brian, on that, but I will also say it doesn't matter which one we need, which one we use, we are not going to do the building. So the reality of it is that our contractors and the people out there are going to be doing the building. So yeah, I agree, but as I said, ultimately, even if we buy the property, we're still waiting for the developer to come in and build it, because we can't. So that's, like I said, it's all kind of the same place, ultimately.
Brian?
I guess, you know, if we have 5 proposals, you know, it's kind of like a scoring thing. So I know that we're not going to be doing the building, but I think that we would want the most bang for our buck. And then we could also, you know, and this is a further, you know, a discussion point for later, but we could, you know, for example, in the land bank, we could require certain density levels be met if we so chose. You know, we have a lot more ability to affect the outcomes of the number of units getting built than we might think.
All right, Aaron, do you feel like you have enough feedback to come back at us next month with more on that?
We do, and next month, maybe just if I could have just the time needed, but we'll make it a priority with regards to developing the RFP, making sure that we include the return on investment stuff that Councilor De La Grange was just talking about, and not only, and expanding one of the criteria, which was how much land would actually be impacted, but also what's the potential development and the numbers of units. So including some of those items in the RFP, we'll develop something for you for your consideration, and I don't think that'll take too long, but we'll get it to you as soon as we can, and for your consideration to where we can maybe publish this and get going on it.
Val?
I just had a question, and this goes back to, have we heard anything about any turnkey money from the state, or where that project is in terms of whether this state has allocated money, or, I mean, it was kind of talked about, but I don't know if whatever came of it, if whether they allocated money, whether they're planning on doing it, because that's another thing that, you know, I know the reality of it is by, which is why 57% of the people are not just going for new housing, but they're also bringing up and old housing to be made usable too. And I think turnkey project is a great way to do that, is to find hotels and motels and make that part of our continuum. So somewhere I'd like to have more information about where that state program is.
I think just to touch on it really quick, as far as I understand it, the state did allocate an amount of money for that, and so that will be rolled out at some point, hopefully this year.
Okay, our third and final big topic, I guess, is the affordable housing projects. If we put it on slide 26, I think, we have $2 million allocated towards this, and we need to get a feel for what it is that you all would like to do with, I think the chart maybe gives...
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll go to the chart. There you go.
There we go. Give some ideas. I mean, this could be anything from, one-time rental assistance over there on the left side of the chart to, to these turnkey type projects, or, cottages. It could be used in a lot of different ways. So I guess those of you who allocated funds, what did you have in mind? Brian?
So personally, my focus would be on the third category, affordable housing development and rehab, specifically the first two bullets, affordable housing development and acquisition, rehab, and conversion of vacant properties for affordable housing, which is still very vague. But within all of those options, that was my kind of thought as to where we would be looking to allocate the resources.
Joel?
Well, I agree with Brian, and one of the most successful programs we've had in our history, when I look back in history, is the GI Bill. Basically, before World War II, a lot of people didn't own their homes, and there wasn't as strong a middle class, and then everybody went to war, which hopefully doesn't happen again, but they came back, and it was, the government thought it was to their advantage for people to own their own houses. And they had the GI Bill then that allowed them very little down and a low interest rate. And a lot of our parents purchased houses under that program. So I agree with what he talked about with affordable housing development and rehab. And I would add to that, given the history of the success of what we've been through in terms of having people buy their own homes, that down payment assistance. That would be a powerful addition to the right column. It's nice for, it's kind of the American dream. And some people are being shut out of that right now. And then the inflation's going up, the down payment's going up. It'd be nice to have some assistance there.
Rick?
I would also be supportive of what Brian is saying and looking at those two items, the affordable housing and rehab and so forth. And there is a church out there right now that's going forward with getting older homes and rehabbing them and making them marketable and allowing families to go in there that normally can't afford it. And I think there are homes out in our community that are older, and some of these are sitting vacant, and it would be nice to see them be rehabilitated as far as the structure goes, because it also improves the city as well. Thank you.
Okay, so you're thinking some blighted properties or rehabbing. Val?
Yeah, I think I'd like that rehab because I just know how expensive new housing is, and I know how expensive subsidized housing is, that I think that when you have the structure there, that there's a lot that you can do. A lot of older homes you can actually turn into duplexes. I mean, there's just a lot of things that we can do. So I'd like, and even the turnkey project, the reality of it is you get those, you have to put more money, into getting them rehabbed. So I personally like the whole rehab portion. Thoughts?
Okay. Any more ideas? Things that stand out to you for those funds? Brian?
So aside from the list up there, and I'm not sure if these ideas would fall within ARPA or if this might be more of something for the CET money, but the idea of a density bonus program where, in the R3 and R4 zones, they have to meet 60%, but if they meet 80% or 90% or whatever, the city provides them an incentive to do so, which would further increase our housing stock. And the other idea, which we already have to some degree, is the SDC waiver program. But I think that we might be able to retool that and kind of look at that to make it more effective based on the goals we're trying to get to. So looking at the SDC waiver program and a density bonus program.
All right, other ideas? We just needed to give staff some ideas to focus on to come back for another workshop. Brian?
There's also been talk over the past year or two about trying to get more ADUs out in the community. So, you know, those are very low cost dwelling units, you know, when you compare them to like a single family home. So as far as an ROI goes, we could have some sort of ADU incentive program that would help to, you know, make it easier for property owners to put ADUs on the property, and that would also increase density in this city and increase our housing stock.
All right, sounds like we have some good ideas. Do you have questions about that before we?
So we've got a couple of things we could bring some information back to you on. I know the housing voucher program was mentioned, the 2 points under affordable housing development rehab, the affordable housing development, and the acquisition, rehab, and conversion. We can focus on those 3 bullet points. Councilor DeLaGrange mentioned a number of them also, and some of those, a couple of those were linked to density bonuses or density unless it was associated with, and the key with ARPA and housing, it's got to be associated with affordable housing. So if it's there to where it's something that is a deed restriction, it's something along those lines, then yes. If it's truly affordable housing, then okay. Some of those items that Councilor DeLaGrange mentioned sound like they'd be excellent items for discussion, but maybe as a discussion of our density program and how we can potentially incentivize and utilize density better in the city.
Do you know, with regards to ARPA, when they say affordable housing, is that, what kind of strings are attached to that?
Well, that's actually that's an easier one to answer because it follows the census tract. It follows our community development block grant funding. So everything associated with low to moderate income and youth. That's truly what ARPA, when it comes to the affordable housing pillar, goes for.
I'm just wondering, with an ADU where, let's say, you know, the rental price is going to be $800 or something, I mean, is that inherently affordable housing, or does it need to be?
It needs to be actually registered and/or deed restriction, so that the property and the development of an ADU would need to be deed restricted, that it is always going to stay affordable housing for 60 years or whatever, and then that would need to be monitored over time. It wouldn't just be the inventory of adding an ADU would not qualify as a affordable housing.
Okay, so that one may be a little complicated with these particular funds.
Yes.
But, okay, but maybe something, multiple people mentioned rehabbing older homes and maybe helping with down payment. It's almost sounding to me like Habitat for Humanity, but instead of building a new home, rehabbing an existing home.
Yeah, when those were mentioned, we already have in our consolidated plan a number of items that focus on rehab of buildings that will help out with that. And those are some of the ones that are probably lower percentage utilization because it requires a certain type of house and to qualify under the census tract. You can't just take a $1 million home and say, I want to utilize this. And so the homes that are associated with complying with what ultimately ARPA would comply with are smaller in nature, and I think we already have a program established to where we have funds that we have a difficult time utilizing each year. So the rehab portion, we'd have to look at more because we sort of have that. We may be able to get creative and help out with that, but the type of homes are very restrictive.
Okay, Brian, then Joel?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that rehab piece. That piece, you know, given that we kind of have a tight timeline with needing to expend the funds, I don't necessarily see rehab as being a huge part of it. It's going to take time. Well, Aaron just said that we already have programs that see low utilization for that, for the rehab. So, you know, as far as bang for our buck with ARPA money goes, it to me makes more sense in this particular category to focus on maybe, you know, larger affordable housing items than just kind of onesie twosie things where we're maybe helping to fix up a house, but it's not necessarily, you know, even creating another unit of housing per se.
Joel?
This is a periphery topic, and it really belongs on the agenda review. When we did the construction excise tax, the proponents said that, well, if inflation occurs, we'll have to re-examine it. So now we're talking about keeping the excise tax where you take money away from the builders, the interest rates going up, it adds to the cost of housing. Then we're talking about motivating the construction of housing through money of Arpa. And the Arpa money is much larger than the construction excise tax is on an annual basis. So one of the things I'm going to propose during agenda review is we put that on and temporarily suspending that excise tax as a financial incentive to try to keep things going during this difficult economic period.
To add to that, you may require some research, and we'll take a look at that. But just like ARPA dollars could be utilized to incentivize system development charges for affordable housing, the construction and excise tax by your code has been developed for affordable housing. So there is a potential that instead of waiving that stopping the execution of the CET, maybe, and I just say maybe, we'll look into it. Can we utilize ARPA dollars during this time frame for any development to pay for the CET, just like we pay for SDCs for affordable housing as an incentive?
Sure, and the construction excise tax also applies to high density buildings, correct?
It applies to affordable housing. If it's high density and affordable, yes.
Well, I mean, it still gets paid regardless of, it's all new construction.
Oh, yes, it's on all new construction. That is correct.
All new construction that is not affordable, right?
That is correct. There is a clause where affordable housing projects are not paying that fee. It's on all other construction.
Okay, sounds to me like we're going to need some work on this affordable housing.
I totally understand that, Mayor. This is so broad that if we can focus on some of the, get some focus, and it is one of your, it's the one that's got the most allocation also. So it's something that we'll have to have further discussion on.
Val?
Yeah, and one of the things that I don't know, bringing this forward at agenda review is understanding deed restrictions and how they're monitored and that sort of thing. And I think it's going to be really important for us all to understand. So I think having that worked into a workshop as well.
So add deed restriction when we talk about ARPA again, when it comes to the programs associated with affordable housing.
Right, exactly, because that's, I think we all need to know that as we move forward, because I think that,
certainly,
deed restrictions are written into the
what
contract for affordable housing, and so we need to understand, as will all the builders, if they are going to build affordable housing, where that is going to be recorded and carried through. So I just think that's just something we need to talk about.
Okay, well, it sounds like our June 13th workshop, then we're going to kind of flesh out some more details on affordable housing projects, purchasing land for affordable housing projects, and the UGB infrastructure to jumpstart development topics. But does anybody have any more burning questions, comments for today? We'll start with Aaron.
I just have on the UGB thing, what we'll do is we'll be bringing forward to you an RFP for your consideration and schedule that as either a workshop or a business meeting, however you'd like to go, Mayor, Council President.
Okay, yeah, and if that part's not quite ready for June 13th or whatever, we'll just those three topics we need to knuckle down on, I guess, and keep moving forward with a plan.
Thank you.
All right. That was the bulk of our conversation for today. We have agenda review. We have budget committee tomorrow night. It's also election night tomorrow, so if people haven't voted, they should do that. May 18th, Wednesday, we have a business meeting at 6 o'clock. We have a council action item to consider purchasing some playground equipment for West Home Park. Council action item, that's a Title 8 pre-treatment code update. A resolution that would consider contributing some tourism lodging tax dollars to the RV cruisers a resolution that would allow commercial use in the parks. That was just for a specific event, I believe, right? It's, yeah, sip and wine event, okay. And then we have a bunch of consent calendar items. One is to purchase a water system remote site SCADA update, a water restoration plant UV system conversion, Hunter Communication contract renewal for data services, a master services agreement for stormwater consultant, resolution that would be task order number 15, Meadowwood Reservoir Design and Construction Services, motion for housing element and policies amendment findings of facts, resolution to award a Dollar Mountain Trailhead parking lot contract, a resolution to award the West Home Park drainage installation contract, a resolution to authorize submitting a Spire grant, and a resolution authorizing a contract with SAFE for workers' compensation, and appointing 2 members to the Sustainability and Energy Action Task Force. Any questions or things that need to be decided before Wednesday? Nope. Okay. And then next week's workshop would be, we've moved these things forward because we delayed the next ARPA discussion. So next week we have street vending zones discussion. That's about people selling things on sidewalks. A review of the urban campground contract. And then we will not have a workshop on May 31st because that's Memorial Day, and that gets us through May. Any questions? DJ.
Yeah, I'd like to request again for the 3rd time that we talk about permanent funding for public safety. A month ago was the 2nd time. About 6 weeks before that was the 1st, and it has yet to be on the agenda. So I'll either make a motion or get a couple councilors to back me up to get this finally talked about again.
We did have one meeting about it, DJ. Is there something specific that you wanted to talk about?
I want to talk about permanent funding sources for public safety, and I want to be able to give staff some direction to start working over some metrics, resolutions, and revenue sources. They have no direction to do any work towards this. They've not been given anything. We've had superficial discussions, but we've not gone in depth, and this is the #1 priority coming out of strategic planning, so it needs to get on the agenda for discussion.
Joel.
Well, and I support DJ, and the reason I support that, getting it back on the agenda, is we decided to take no action, really. There was no motion and we had a lot of information. I did get some more information from, like we talked about at agenda setting session with Vista. And our fees, franchise fees, Avista was, and PP&L was there also at the meeting. They were amazed that our fees were so low. And it was lower than the other communities. And if you look at the other communities, they use that as a significant source of funding. Not that it's going to solve our problems, but it can provide some of that direction to relieve some of the burden in a way that is analogous to what other cities are doing. And so as we look at that, and the same thing with the water fees, and the same thing with keeping the levy, but perhaps at a reduced rate, there's solutions there, and we need to make a conscious decision. If we decide not to take an action, I'd like to see it done through a motion, rather than just through delaying it. And if there's something there that we need to give direction to staff to make even better, I think it's a timely thing to do it before we run to the end of the 3-year levy. So I would support putting it on the agenda.
Val?
Yeah, I would also support it because I do believe it's our number one goal. I think I will say once again, to me, diversifying is really important because with the economics where it is, we can't put all our eggs in one basket. So I would like, direction-wise, I like the idea about the franchise fees. I think that's a good thing to get a comparison. So that might be a good place to start in terms of just getting a comparison of what other cities and bringing that to the council. Also, we talked about at one point getting and seeing what some other local areas have. I think what we're going to have to do is do a real education session to the public. And so that's what's going to really take the breadth of time. And so I think it's important that we start looking at it so that we can put together that discussion and bring a better understanding of what other communities do for the funding. So I will also support moving it forward.
Okay.
Sure, I think that's great. Building on that as far as specific direction, I think we need to look at all the revenue sources as subsidy for each other. I think let's look at sales tax, let's look at payroll tax, let's look at seasonal sales tax, and how could that possibly affect the tax levy? Could we reduce the tax levy, find other resources of revenue, and end up, better in the budget that we are? So the goal would not be to have staff come with those numbers, but have the expectation that when we have that conversation, those are the kind of questions that I'm going to be tasking them with answering.
Okay, well, as much as you can let them know ahead of time what you're looking for, that will be helpful because that's been, I guess, part of the issue is waiting for council to develop some ideas for staff to look into on that particular topic. So if you can touch base with Aaron and let him know what ideas you have, that would be helpful before the presentation.
Well, and I think Sarah's right, and I think DJ's right also, but then as we move forward, that we establish council direction with a motion. And if it's to take no action, that we establish that. I think it needs to be a conscious decision and not a lack of action.
I don't think, I don't know, people are implying here that we're delaying something or that, avoiding having the discussion. I think that's not at all true. It's just a matter of providing some further direction before we move forward. And I know that several counselors have been working on this issue and developing some ideas. So if it's ripe to come forward, we'll bring it forward, but I don't really appreciate the insinuation that something's being ignored. Valerie.
I will insinuate it as well. This is clear obstinance that is happening. I'll say it in front of everybody in the room. The reason we haven't talked about this is obstinance from our leadership. There's no other reason. As I mentioned, this is the third time I've asked for it, and there is no excuse why this hasn't gone on the agenda. So we could keep talking about this, or we can accept it.
Okay, well, you're wrong, but Valerie, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, we've had Arpa, and that's been a pretty big thing on our plate. I will also say that one of the things that when we did discuss it and have discussed it, I have an aversion right now to putting a lot on our water bill because our water bill has been so high because of the water treatment plant. I think myself, where I took a breath was the fact that when we heard that we'd applied for a grant and there was a possibility that we might have less of a problem with our water treatment plant fee, that might make me feel more open to other options. And that's something that I've been kind of waiting, and I know that's not going to happen until probably August. Is that what we heard? So that's kind of there. So I think at this time what we need to start doing is just building out the options. I don't think I can make a decision before that happens. So that's why I have hesitated a little bit, because I knew that was something that I was waiting on to find out. Because it doesn't matter what, franchise fee or public safety fee, fees all go on the water bill.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I was going to throw out the same thing. I think where council left off was that we were going to await hearing back from FEMA on that BRIC grant. So, we may have been absent for that counselor phaser, but it's not necessarily that we don't want to have this conversation, it's that we're waiting for that possible grant opportunity, and we'll move forward from there. I'm afraid with the direction that's been given today, staff is going to simply revisit the many presentations that they have presented us already, because council is not providing that direction on which one to move forward on. So I think it's wise for us to remain on our path of waiting to hear back from that FEMA grant and then moving forward from there so we know our options.
With all due respect, it doesn't matter. We have 3 counselors that want it on the agenda, and I expect to see it on the agenda soon.
Joel?
And that wasn't to say that I don't support that. It was
Point of order, Vanessa and DJ, you have to be recognized to speak. Thank you.
So we need a moment of silence and we can proceed. But, Vanessa is right. We need to know that, and Valerie's right. We need to know that information. So when we schedule the discussion, have it after we know what the status of those grants are. If I remember correctly, those grants are going to be decided by June or July. August, okay, so we need to put it on the backside or schedule it in August for discussion, because that way we'll have the appropriate information to make a decision, whether it's no action or action.
Rick?
I agree with DJ that I feel at this stage, even if we're waiting for August and decisions on the water treatment plant, we could be gathering information, discussing different options, so then we don't have to be starting to have that discussion in August. We will already have had that discussion. So I would like to see some progress made. Thank you.
All right, new subject. DJ, did you have something else?
Yeah, I do. Let's see. I had a council community connection with Kurt, and Aaron was able to join us. We had a great meeting. I reminisced on times before COVID and recalled some really fun things that council was doing before COVID shut us down. Particularly, we entertained a pilot program for food trucks in Riverside Park. That didn't necessarily finish, that pilot project. We didn't get the feedback that we wanted. We also were talking about a food truck event, like a Battle of the Bones kind of thing, or something that White City did. They did their first year and then COVID hit and they weren't able to do their second year. We also talked about strategic planning and the kayak idea that Kurt had. And we all kind of came to a really neat conclusion that I think it's time that we focus on something fun. We need to do something fun, awesome, enjoyable, something we can celebrate, enjoy together. I'd like to start focusing on those things. So my request is twofold: to put on future talks, obviously not nearly as important as permanent funding for public safety, but the two things, I'd like to start investigating the viability of a kayak park. That would include hiring a consultant, letting them do their work. We're all very familiar with that. The city does a lot of it. But also to start following the path out of COVID with park activity, outside activity. Summer's coming. I would personally like to see up to 2 vendors in Riverside Park again. Maybe organizing it this year would be a little zealous, but some kind of city-sponsored partnership event with food trucks or something to get people out again and back to normal, as I mentioned, as council was working very hard on before COVID started preventing those things. So there's 2 requests there.
Okay, council, are you interested in having a workshop about a food truck event or food trucks in the park? Valerie says yep, okay. All right, anything else for today?
Kayak park. There was 2 things. Please pay attention to what I'm saying. There was 2 things there. The kayak park. We need to start investigating, having a consultant come in. There are some histories of that. I think that staff might be able to put together, perhaps even a memo at this point might be fine, but I'm actually asking for some time at the dais to talk about this. They can bring forth prior investigation into this. I know Kurt has a lot of really good information about who the consultant would be, et cetera. I'd actually kind of like to give staff a little direction to start looking into who is the consultant, who's the expert, what's their availability look like, and have a workshop once all that starts to kind of come together, with the ultimate goal being taking an actual first step into investigating the viability of a kayak park in this community, which would be hiring a consultant to go through all the environmental issues and infrastructure issues and all those kind of things. I'd like to get a step forward in that direction.
Okay, council, is there interested in getting kayak park going on the agenda? Brian, you have your hand up. Is that a yes?
It's not a yes, I just have a comment. I have a whole list of fun things that I would really like to work on and bring to council, but I'm like holding them back because there's all this really important work that we're trying to get done, and I know staff has a certain bandwidth. So I just would like to have counselors be mindful of what we're asking staff to prioritize. And I personally am not sure that right now that needs to be a priority.
Okay, are there counselors who are interested in getting kayak park going on the agenda?
Well, I just
Val.
have a question, because it seems to me, in reading through the packet, I want to say this last week, I don't know if it was tourism committee or the destination marketing, but somebody is out there talking about it in a committee. Am I correct? I just remember reading it, because I do actually read through that committee, and I think because I was wondering the same thing, because it was one of our priorities this year, and so I hadn't heard anything, and then I saw it in this packet that I think I read online this last week. So I'm not opposed to that idea, but I want to say maybe it was Parks, I don't know, but it was some committee was discussing it, and I thought, well, great, that's a great place for it to start for them to do some research on it, because I agree that right now the bandwidth of our staff is pretty stretched. So I'm not opposed to it, because I do think it is on our agenda and it needs to start. I just am not sure that staff has the bandwidth right now to do that. As far as the...
This is true. We have, so I believe Tourism Committee has touched on it. We have been in the process of hiring a new park superintendent to, hopefully we'll get somebody on board soon. Yeah. Aaron, did you have a comment?
If it would help, we could do we have been doing some research in the background, knowing that this was a two-star item coming out of strategic planning, and so we've gathered some information with regards to our past experience and efforts within the city in a kayak park, and we can get that out to you in a memo to start this, and then see where it goes from there, if you so desire.
Yep.
Works for me.
I can accept that. I could back off on trying to pursue, taking time on the agenda, but yeah, I think that's why it's just, give us what you got, Aaron.
Okay, we'll get a memo going with some background. Joel?
So I would like to propose suspending the construction excise tax on our agenda. The reason I'm doing that is because of the economic conditions that we're presently in and that we're going to be moving into. The tax is increasing every day with inflation. The last time we went through this, and hopefully I'm not overreacting to that, but it was dead, and all construction was dead. And the construction excise tax is not a incentivizer. It decentivizes it, because it's an extra expense that gets passed on and makes housing even more expensive. It's an unintended consequence. When interest rates were low, it was something, but when I was talking to a realtor last week, and interest rates are now up to 7% and maybe going higher. I know when I bought my first house, they were 9%, and some people were paying 15%. So it's not unheard of, and this on top of that, I think is detrimental to our community, especially now that we have money for affordable housing that is coming through other means that we can use to develop that. So I would just like it to put it on the agenda, and if there's two other counselors that would like to do that, that's great, and if there's not that interest, then that's okay too.
Okay, council, are you interested in getting the CET tax back on the agenda?
Well, I do know that on June 2nd, we are having a roundhouse discussion with a series of builders and I think you were invited as well, and I think that would be a great opportunity to talk to them and seeing the impact that it's having, and after that time, I would be interested in doing that if I talk with them.
And I'm talking about a 2-year, what do you call it, suspension during the economic period so that it isn't a decentivizer, because there's enough decentivizers out there right now.
And I totally get that.
Okay, so I'm not sure are you waiting, or do you want to see if there's 3 counselors now?
Well, what I heard Valerie say, could you repeat that again, Valerie?
On June 2nd, there is the Chamber of Commerce is holding a housing
Forum.
Yes, with the builders there to have a
Right.
discussion about the CET
So we can wait
tax.
till after that and see
Okay.
what the activity is actually going to look like.
Okay, thank you.
It's tough right now, especially for young people, and the tax doesn't help much.
Okay, well, I guess bring it up again after June 2nd if you're still interested in that, Joel. All right, anything further for today? Val?
Yeah, I don't know if everybody else received the email from Nathan Miller concerning the emergency management and asking why we haven't had any sort of meeting, because in the past we talked about having a meeting with the emergency management, talking about the fire safety and some of the issues, and we had at one point talked about having a evacuation plan, and then it was kind of put off, and then said we might talk about it later. And with fire season coming upon us really soon, I think it would be a really good to have a discussion and have the county and the city here and Sarah to talk about the emergency plan. So I would like to see that put on the agenda soon.
Yeah, we talked about that the other day, but I'm looking to see, I thought we had it, but maybe we don't.
Well, we have a fireworks red flag discussion for council. That's on June 1st.
Yeah, that's pretty limited, though.
But that's limited in scope, yes.
Okay. Yeah, we've talked about having another meeting with emergency management, and I thought it was on there, but it's not, so we will do that. Okay, anything further? Brian?
I move we adjourn.
Second from Val, thanks. All in favor of adjourning today?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned. See you on Wednesday evening.